Hey, Whiskey Ringers, welcome to a brand new intro. First off, there are still a few bottles of our single barrel rye finished in Armagnac casks, picked in partnership with This Is My Bourbon podcast. Check out the show notes for links to purchase. Second, I am thrilled to announce that I've joined the Bar Cart Co-op. This group of podcasts and shows has a show or multiple for everyone. I'll talk more about them in the mid-roll. Finally, there are still two $25 spots available on Patreon. These are the last two spots that will ever be open on that tier, so if you've been putting it off, grab your spot today. There are also spots available at the $15 a month level if you want to support but can't quite commit to that $25 tier just yet. There's a spot in supporting for everyone's budget, and I truly thank you all for making this podcast possible. Hey, Whiskey Ringers, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today, we are doing the first long-form interview for River Roots Barrel Company out of Cleveland, Ohio, and to talk about River Roots, about the work involved and how they're picking their whiskeys, we have on Ryan Lintz. So Ryan, welcome on.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we jump too far into the episode, let's say, what is your role at River Roots?
I'm owner and founder of the company. I guess my title would be the CEO. So kind of making the operational kind of decisions, direction forward for the company.
Gotcha. And this is a newer company. This is brand new, really, just a couple of months old. So let's start there. Let's start with the launch.
The story. So we launched back in September, but really it took 2 to 3 years to get it started. Kind of to give a little history around it. I have a friend that's a brewer and has been brewing in the Cleveland area for 30 years. A couple of years ago, he borrowed a barrel of Blanton's. I'm part of the Cleveland Bourbon Club. So this bourbon club that we're in just has 20 members, and every month we do blind tastings and stuff like that. But also we do all sorts of barrel picks, go across the country, Buffalo Trace, various things. So we had a barrel of Blanton's, and I gave it to my friend, a brewer that aged a stout in it for like a year and a half. So a year and a half later, he gives me a couple of bottles of the stout and rolls his barrel in my backyard, and then we start drinking. We actually have drinking some of the things behind me here, just kind of messing around. He's like, "Hey, man, I got this investor that's interested in doing a brewery and a distillery. What do you think about that?" And I was like, "Oh, man, like craft distilling, it's kind of difficult sourcing stuff. I think that's kind of the way to go." And we started to talk about it. He was like, "Hey, why don't you build up a business plan and give it to the investor?" So I ended up doing the business plan. That investor didn't necessarily work out. However, like 3 or 4 months later, a friend of mine in the Cleveland Bourbon Club that has connections to Michael Symon. So people that don't know who Michael Symon is, he's a celebrity chef on the Food Network, also restaurateur, all over the country. But really, he grew up, and a lot of his restaurants are in Cleveland, and he's definitely Cleveland famous for sure. So he was saying, "Hey, Symon is interested in getting into the bourbon industry." And I was just like, "Well, actually, I have a business plan." Showed the business plan, talked about the model, and got it approved. And over the last, I would say, 2 years from that, it was going through the state of Ohio and the TTB of getting everything up and running. So maybe and we launched in September with Michael Symon kicking it off on a stream, and we've been every week, every month, kind of a snowball effect of doubt. Right now, it's just kind of building the brand awareness. And maybe stepping back a little bit about like what is the whole idea of River Roots. So we are a distillery. We will play around. Tom Gray, one of the owners, who is that brewmaster that's been brewing 30 years, he is going to be our distiller as well. He's learned a lot of things from the beer industry, a lot of interesting things about the grains, and I told him to just go absolutely wild with that stuff and let's have fun. Right now we're playing with some ryes and stuff like that, but actually, transparently, that's like 5 or 10% of our business. 90 or 95% of the business is really just sourcing whiskey, and actually really not just even whiskey. I'm looking into tequilas and rums as well. I love Armagnac. I guess I'm a whiskey nerd, bourbon nerd. I've started 10 years ago, kind of building up my palate. I had a Maker's Mark and a Elmer T. Lee, and I was like, wow, Elmer T. Lee's pretty good. And then I kind of went through the rabbit hole of, if you can see the bottles behind me, about exploring Dusties and Willets and Four Roses and all that type of jazz. And then I started to get, even once I built that platform of bourbon, then I went to Rise. Then after Rise, I went to Rums. Then Rums, I went to Armagnac. And it's just kind of been exploring the spirits from there, really. And with my exposure to the Cleveland Bourbon Club and friends in Kentucky and the bourbon community, I've been on 50 or so barrel picks across the country. So that was the idea, is, having a company that, yes, is doing a little bit of distilling, but really just trying to find the best barrels of spirits, and bringing them in to the company and offering them as single barrel selections. So yeah, that's kind of the premise. Maybe I've yapped a little bit more about that. Maybe you have some additional questions, but that's the premise of how we got started and the general idea of the company.
It makes total sense. And the Cleveland Bourbon Club is very, as you said, it's 20 members. It's pretty exclusive. I'm obviously not in Cleveland, so I can't even ask how to get in. But the idea of it is to explore these different spirits, and there's something to be said about a new whiskey company being started by someone who is a whiskey nerd, who loves, as you said, not just whiskeys but rums, armagnacs, tequilas. So and it's an audio only podcast, but I have to say there's an incredible selection behind them. I picked out, there's an old box of Old Crows up there that the Chessmans, which are my favorites, and clearly, having been on 50 barrel picks, it's impressive. I mean, with the Whiskey Ring just started our own barrel picks back in June, with first one's coming out in September, and it's fun. It is a fun thing to do, but it also takes some takes a lot of effort. So I got to recognize that, of course, as well.
For sure.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say, no, for sure. And with the connections and the Cleveland Bourbon Club, just to kind of back up, it is only 20. And the reason why it's only 20 members and exclusive, we'd love to open it to more people, but it's mostly because the main focus of the club is just blind tastings. And part of the dues is procuring interesting bottles. And then when you have 20 people, that's about an ounce and a half each of each pour. So we love to have 50 or 100 or 200 people, but really it's just kind of focusing on the blind tasting. So that's why it's like that. And yeah, I mean, the barrels and stuff like that, it's just, you kind of learn, right? Like everybody has their own favorite distilleries and bottlings and stuff like that. And really Cleveland, in the Cleveland area, or really in the Ohio area, there's kind of in the Midwest area, truthfully, is no one's really focused on a barrel program and, sourcing good whiskey and making it available. And like you said, David, one of my favorite parts about bourbon in general is just the barrels. Like really, when you go on a barrel pick and you have 3 barrels in front of you, or 5, whatever distiller, sometimes it can be the Wild West, you can taste everything, but most of the time it's 3. When you taste those 3 barrels and taste the variances of it, that is one of the things that I wanted to bring to the Midwest here, is showing that experience of really good Kentucky, or wherever you want to, wherever it's from good distilleries, making that experience available to more of the masses. So that was kind of one of the crux, but also being able to totally nerd out and understanding the bourbon community as a whole, is having some really cool and interesting barrels that would be widely available across the country.
Sure. And I think my first exposure to River Roots was, I'm not sure which one came first. It was both of them were about the Seelbach bottle, the 146 proof. But I think it was either seeing the email / text from Seelbach, or it was seeing that one dude Ryan on Instagram opening the bottle and being like, "Holy crap, this is some good stuff." And but even, I want to jump back even before that, which was the launch, and you said it was launched with Michael Symon doing a live. Um, he's got the involvement, of course, and he brings a certain cachet with him, both in the Cleveland area, but to a national audience as well. Yet, from everything I've seen, website, press releases, all that, it's very clearly, at least to me, not a celebrity whiskey brand at all. Like, it's not Michael Symon's brand, whiskey. It's River Roots, and he happens to be a contributor and a partner in it. So, yeah, I'll just throw that out there.
No, that's a part of the conversation that we had with the investors and Michael Symon, is about like, hey, would it be beneficial to brand it as Michael Symon's? And based on my experience, I said, some of the celebrity bourbons, as a bourbon drinker, a whiskey drinker, my impression, and David, yours might be completely different, but this was mine at the time, and why we didn't go with this is, when a celebrity is attached to a brand, I'm already thinking lesser of it. If it's, Michael Symon's bourbon, I was just like, okay. I mean, even though Michael Symon is a chef and obviously has a great palate, but even still, the brand is positioned in a marketing from a celebrity perspective, and not necessarily focused on the whiskey or the bourbon. So that's why we never labeled it Michael Symon or promoted it that way. Yes, he's doing barrel picks and we're putting a name on that, but the whole premise of the company is about just finding really good barrels of whiskey, and not necessarily about using Michael Symon's name to promote the brand. That is obviously important, but not the primary focus of it.
So when you're thinking about this, when you're coming at it from a, like we said, a whiskey and a spirits connoisseur, nerd, whichever term you want to use, background.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that business plan a little bit. What was the intended audience that you were really looking for?
Yeah, the intended audience was really people like you and me and all your listeners, is kind of, going towards that market around having a single barrel label. Actually, is there one here available? Yep. And I'll kind of describe this to the people that are on the podcast. But if you can see this is one of our prototypes. Actually, our new label comes out in just a couple of weeks. But the idea is that when you do a barrel pick, that barrel is yours. And why not have a lot more real estate on the label to make the label yours? I mean, you picked that whiskey, you paid for it, so why not have fun with the label too? And yes, a lot of brands, have a little spot where you can put your club name or your business name and stuff like that. And then, yes, you can add the stickers and have fun that way. But the idea with this is that, you could put the selected by in an area, which is pretty common. Then you have a large port of real estate where there's a graphic on the top where you can, do whatever you want with. And then in the middle, you can name the barrel, put your logo there, whatever. So if not the most customizable or most space dedicated towards the customer, definitely in the top 5 in the bourbon community, where you can really customize the label. So yeah, that was kind of going back to your question, David, about the idea. It was focused on single barrel, cask strength, give it to the nerds, or the enthusiasts. I'm sorry, I call myself a nerd, so hopefully your audience doesn't get offended to that. But people like to geek out on whiskey. That was really the primary focus of the company. As we've evolved, and we only started in September, as we evolved and more people are trying to taste it and love Michael Symon and just love the idea of the brand, and especially it being from Cleveland area, is understanding that 147 proof 14-year-old bourbon, or some of our 5 years 128 proof, it's a little bit hot from the average Joe's, the entry level. So now we're starting to play with small batches or blending and stuff like that, which we can talk about later, which has been a fun experience as well.
And I think that's a perfect point to jump into the product so far. So like I said, my first experience was seeing the 146, 147 proof 13-year-old, which, I mean, I'm a proof hound, so I
Yeah.
admittedly missed the bottle, but I'm going to try to get a sample from someone. But so we can't, we talked about this a little bit off air before we started. The exact companies we can't say because of NDAs, but what we can talk about, mash bills and where you were looking at as someone who wanted to start this company, for, where you wanted to source from. So let's,
Right.
I guess, start with,
Yeah. We wanted to start off with some barrels of spirit that could really grab people's attention, especially, the bourbon connoisseurs, and really say like, hey, this isn't just your run of the mill NDP. Like we're really trying to find really good stuff. So yes, one of the first barrels that we sourced, we only could find four of them. I would have bought more if I could have, but four at the time, 13-year-old Kentucky bourbon that was aged 6 years in port wine barrels. So what does that mean exactly? So what happened is there was, at that time, it was 6 or 7 year old Kentucky bourbon that was then put into a port wine barrel, which is 60 gallons, and filled to the top. And then once that was then, topped off and let sit for 6 years in that port wine barrel. And then so when we got them, it was these four barrels were, our lowest one 140 proof, our highest one is 148 proof, and they're super super dark from that port. And in October they actually turned 14, so it's now 14-year-old Kentucky bourbon aged 7 years in port wine barrels.
sounds incredible. uh, um, I'm salivating a little bit, I'm not going to lie. So when we're looking at, because obviously whiskey nerd, we're gonna do that, and I think everyone who listens to this could qualify as a whiskey nerd. We're of course going to look at, okay, it's 13-year-old Kentucky bourbon, so that immediately knocks out a wide swath of potential. And then, who's got space to and ability to age for another 6 years in port and just have it sit there, which also I think knocks out a few more because
Yeah.
you need those resources. Now, how do I want to ask the next question? Were you able to source directly from the distilleries, or did you still have to go through a barrel broker?
Yeah, no, great question. This so the spirit uh was obviously distilled by a distillery in Kentucky, but it didn't come from that distillery. The whole when I reference, having that spirit that's at the time, what was it, 6 or 7 year old Kentucky bourbon, and dumping it into um the port wine barrel, that was done from another distillery that sourced it from the original distillery, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah, gotcha.
So it's a very interesting, it's a source from a source, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So even then, you're looking. Let's keep going nerdy. I mean, you're looking at
Yeah.
19 years. No, that's not.
No.
No,
So yeah,
no,
I think,
14. Yeah.
yeah, it's 14. It's kind of it's kind of confusing, and I've had a conversation with people about this before. But yes, it is official. It was 7-year-old bourbon when it was dumped 7 years ago into that port wine barrel. So then it aged an additional 7 years in that port wine barrel.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm looking at the products, and I'm just like wanting to taste them all.
Yeah.
So that was the port barrel finished. What can you tell us about the type of port, or what kind of flavors you get off of that?
Yeah,
That
the port. I mean, it's really interesting, and each barrel is different. And honestly, we have all four barrels are accounted for right now. There's only that first one, but I'll tell you, Seelbach has one. There's a group out in California that just selected the other one, and then we have the last one that we're keeping for ourselves. And the last one that we're keeping for ourselves is the one that's considerably much more off profile. It's the 140 proof one, while the others are between 147 and 148. I would say the other three, they're 147, 148 proof, right? Like, so, I mean, they're hot. Some people, and every person's different, and it's been super fascinating and fun to get people's reviews and hear their tasting notes of it. Some think that it doesn't taste that. I guess it all depends. And honestly, the barrels have been open a little bit. I think some air has helped kind of mellow out that proof a little. But I get a lot from these, like this fudge chocolate brownie. Obviously, you kind of get like this fig or dark fruit notes to it as well. It's very sweet on the palate. The noses are incredible as well. They kind of follow the palate as well. And then the finish, obviously, with that type of proof, you get that old Kentucky hug pretty easily with these. The one that I was talking about, that's one a little bit more off profile, it has that, but it also has like some funkiness to it. If you or any of your listeners have ever had like an armagnac, where and it kind of does make sense when you think about it. When that armagnac gets old and has kind of that funky grape kind of note to it that makes it interesting, almost has like a dusty funk to it. That's the one that we kept that we thought was interesting. So
The Bar Cart Co-op is a group of 5 shows with something for everyone. First up is My Whiskey Den, hosted by Michael Symon, Pat Bologna, and Mitch Weddle. Listen and watch live on Mondays at 9 for thoughts and discussions on craft spirits and, once in a while, some downright odd things. And yes, I'm talking about the cantaloupe liqueur that I can't believe could be good, yet I gotta admit, it's fantastic. Next up is Bourbon Turntable, hosted by Kevin Rose and Drew Crawley. Kevin and Drew are true lovers of both music and bourbon, and I got to join them to talk about my own whiskey and music journey back in March. It's still one of my favorite episodes I've ever been a part of, and it's a show that I listen to every single week. The next two are from a guy you may have heard of. After all, he's a 2-time guest on the Whiskey Ring podcast. Mr. Alan Bishop, head alchemist at Spirits of French Lick and self-proclaimed reviver of the history of Indiana's Black Forest. Alan has 2 shows in the co-op, both of which are also weekly listens for me. The first one is Distiller's Talk, with co-host Christy Atkinson. It's probably the nerdiest spirits podcast I know of, and that's including my own, and I absolutely love it. Some weeks you'll be talking and capturing wild yeast in long-gone ghost distilleries in the Black Forest region. Others you'll be hearing from some of the most exciting up-and-comers in the distilling, brewing, and overall spirits-producing industry. Most of these distillers he's gone, I've never even heard of before the episode, but after listening, all I want to do is find out more and explore new ways of looking at spirits and all the nerdy stuff that I love about this industry. And last but certainly not least is Alan's other podcast, If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Exploring the paranormal side of Hoosier-occupied Kentucky, Alan intertwines his own experiences with stories about neighbors, colleagues, and local legends, and why you should never go into the forest alone at night. Part scary story, part homage to the rich history of southern Indiana, this show comes straight from Alan's heart and soul. Take a listen or watch to any of these amazing shows, and thank you to the Bar Cart Co-op community for welcoming me. Join the community on Facebook, follow on Instagram and YouTube, and you'll have another show for every day of the week. That sounds like something I would love. Big into Armagnac as well. Working on an episode or 2 for the podcast right now to explain a little more about what Armagnac is. For my money, it's the only place you can find 40, 50, 60-year-old spirits for, less than a mortgage. So
sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So like exactly your thought process is why I got into Armagnac probably about 5 years ago. Is like I have some back here that are like 30 years old and stuff like that. And I was getting them for like $100 or $150. I mean, stuff like that on the bourbon market. I mean, it'll be insane, right? And I think the leap to Armagnac to, okay, you like bourbon. Then if you like bourbon and if you like Dusties, and if you like Dusties, then I feel like then you're ready for the Armagnac because you can find, and it depends on where those Armagnacs are coming from, but you can find a bourbon, you can find a bourbon kind of dusty notes in a lot of Armagnacs, which makes it super fun to explore and getting some really, really interesting things for sure.
Yeah, I just love it. Uh, before I move on from the port bow finish, you said it was a different distillery that uh, was aging it in the port, or a different producer,
Hmm.
let's say. Was that second also in Kentucky?
No, that one's not in Kentucky. So
Okay,
it aged an additional 6 years out of Kentucky.
gotcha. Um, all right. So with that, the if you look on the River Roots website currently, as we're talking, and this is late in 2023, episode should
Yep.
come out within a couple of weeks, so should still be available. We have a couple of the quote unquote younger. I use younger like this is still
Yeah.
5 year old bourbon. So we've got the two single barrels selected by Michael Symon and
Yep.
the Founders Reserve bourbon, the Dawn.
Right.
So for someone who's looking at a new NDP,
Hmm.
new products on the market, not necessarily on the shelf, but on sites, on Seelbach, uh, how would you walk someone through like which products they want to try? And let's also assume for the
Yeah.
purposes of this that um, your your full lineup is available, because I know not everything's available yet,
Right.
or some things are sold out too. So, but let's assume
Yeah.
everything's available. How would you walk someone through them?
Yeah. So and by the time this, well, it'll be getting close, but I would recommend your followers, your listeners to follow the River Roots on Instagram or watch on our website because there will be some other, we have some barrels, other barrels outside of this 5 year and the now 14-year-old port. We have some other stuff coming out. So I'll get into that. Let me kind of talk about what we have now and what's to come. Um, so yes, we have a 5 year Kentucky bourbon, and that was our first kind of big core purchase. Um, as a whiskey drinker, 5 years, yes, that is seems on the younger side. I was just the most important thing to me was finding good tasting barrels, and secondary was the marketability of it. So I tasted a lot of stuff that was older, but honestly didn't taste as good as this 5 year. And so, the mash bill being 74% corn, I got, usually from the distillery, I get a lot of like bubblegum type of notes to it. Uh, and truthfully, it's not my favorite Kentucky distillery from a profile perspective. But when I taste these particular barrels, it's like it had for a 5 year, no youthful notes whatsoever out of any of the barrels that we had, and it definitely didn't have the regular type of profile that I would get from this distillery. So, and they range from proof from around like 128. So I thought that this was a good bottle to offer right out of the gate as single barrels, cast strength. They are on the website for $84. Um, and yeah, so those are our first ones, and those are single barrels and Michael Symon ones. So they have, I think, his dog on there as one of the selections, and one of them has his just like signature on it. So yeah, that's the first offering. It's the 5 year Kentucky bourbon at cast strength single barrels. Um, Also, like I was saying earlier in this podcast, is we started to realize that we needed stuff more for entry level drinkers that wanted to experience the brand and what we were after.
Hmm.
So I've always played around with doing blend stuff like that, and a lot of people in the industry, Dixon, Ryan and Kenny. There's all sorts of individuals that have been doing some great. Ed Bly from back in the day. Well, he's coming up with the new things. Some people that have done a good job on blending. So it was super duper fun, more than I thought I would have fun with blending. It was great. So we currently have for $53 online a 5-year small batch, which we're calling our Founders Reserve. For 5-year age statement, it's 95 proof. I feel like it's a pretty good price from a non-producer. And so what we did is we got these 5-year bourbons, started blending them. The really cool thing is, like, when you started to taste individual barrels and putting them together, this first batch is only 3 barrels together. So you start playing with the, blending different barrels together, and you're thinking, like, how different could it really be? Like, how could these taste? We were only using 3 barrels. Could they be that different? And they were. They were incredibly different. So the ones that we have is still it's 95 proof. So that was the main focus, of make something that's more approachable to the common drinker, but also stands up to a bourbon drinker nerd like myself that could also drink it and enjoy it and not be like totally uninterested in it. And with this blend it has that cinnamon, kind of has that rye up front that kind of works, but then also there's this very sweetness mid palate and on the finish that people really enjoy. So yeah. And in the future, so we're going to have more fun with this. This is our first batch, and we're calling it. We're kind of using the Booker's type of marketing. Is we're naming our batches. The first batch is called the Dawn, the beginning, obviously, and has a little picture of a little sunset rising, or sunrise, yeah. But then the next batch that we make will be completely different name and will be completely different blends of whiskeys. So that will be fun. We've toyed around the idea. Me and some of the owners love rum, so not just finishing bourbon and rum, but maybe also doing a blend of rum and bourbon together. So anyways, hey, it's going to be fun. We're just kind of nerding out on this whole experience, and we're kind of do batches about what seems cool and what tastes good. And we're always going to try to keep the small batch, obviously, at a lower price point to make it more digestible from a purchase perspective.
I think that's that's smart. I mean, people are gonna. I think nerds among us we're willing to pay the the 84, 85 for the single barrels. It's kind of. I think you would agree. I hope you don't find it offensive to say. I think that's within reasonable range, maybe a little bit higher, but not. We're not talking 150 for 5-year. So
Right.
It's not outside of the range. Bourbon prices are all going up, so I don't think that's really out of the realm. But for the small batch at 55, that to me that's perfectly in range.
Yeah.
Especially if you follow the $10 a year kind of Scotch model.
Right.
That's perfectly within range, and it's not that far above. Like I look at a 7-year Heaven Hill at Bottled and Bond. That's it's $15 less, but that's also volume.
Right.
You bring the price down on volume. So on volume, I think again still within reach. And for any listeners wondering, like why is he justifying the prices? I did not receive any kind of this is not a promotional thing. Like I'm genuinely interested in the company, so I didn't receive anything to say it. I just think, in my personal view, these are very justifiable prices for things that are, especially for things that are rare. You look at the 140 plus proof. You find something for 140 plus proof, it's going to be around that price. That's just what things are. And I'd rather enjoy it and find those products. And if they're good products, I'll pay for them. So
right.
I want.
I was. Oh, sorry.
No, good.
No, I would agree with you, especially on the 14 going to be 14-year-old. I'm a consumer first. The thought process that you and all the other listeners have is the same stuff that I think about as well. And when we put these prices, yes, as a business, we're not just, if we distilled this stuff, our margin, we can lower the price and get the margin that we want to just be a sustainable business. But we need to kind of fit into what's the threshold and where do we want to be price wise. And in particular, it was a very interesting conversation about the 13 port, which is now 14. Is there you try to like, okay, what's the market for it? There's nothing like it. Like, who the hell has a bourbon that was aged 6, now 7 years in a port wine barrel that's 148 proof? It's like non-existent. I wish, like I said in the beginning, I wish I had more than 4 barrels, but that's what it is. And when we originally launched it and the company just started, the sales were a little bit slow. But as people started to realize it and taste it, they're like, "Oh shit!" So they started to jump on it. So the price that was actually, we sold out of the port quicker than the 5 year barrels that we had available. So that just kind of shows you the market for that type of stuff.
Oh yeah, by the time I came across it, it was long gone. So
Yeah,
that's why I said I got to find someone who grabbed a bottle. Maybe I'll reach out to Ryan, see if he
yeah.
did that. I'll do that before this podcast comes out so it doesn't get inundated. Um, so one thing you said that is a possibility, but I wanted to just pick up on it because it sounded really interesting, was this idea of, mixing spirits, mixing categories. So, not to bring in another company, but it's more for comparison than anything else. One of my favorite spirits that I tried in 2023 was the Bacta 1928. It's a blend of rye, Armagnac, and Calvados, and I loved it. It was delicious, and I've become really interested in these kind of cross category blends because you really didn't see that. Maybe rarely you would see a cross country blend, like Barrel did some where they have an Indiana and a Canadian rye together. Um, but it was still pretty rare even to find cross country, let alone cross category. And that could be a huge market hole to enter into. So I'm very curious to see if you go that way.
Yeah, I mean, we've been playing around with it. One of the things, I 100% agree with you, by the way, and it's why we're exploring it. One of the things that you kind of lose when you blend is you're no longer in the bourbon category. You're kind of in the blend of. I spoke to the TTB about what the naming would have to be on the label, but you kind of go outside of that, having like straight straight Kentucky bourbon whiskey on the thing to a blend of blah, blah, blah. And then you start the marketability of it to the common Joe that's looking at the bottle. You kind of lose them, or you're not in the sections with all the other bourbons and things like that. So those are things we're exploring now, but I don't think that will deter us. And I think that's probably one of the best things about this company is the flexibility that we have. We're not, when we make these batches, like I said, our first batch was a 3 barrel, right? Like, hey, if we use some rum and some bourbon and mix it together and use like a handful of barrels and takes a little bit, we're not a big distiller that's using hundreds or thousands of barrels. So we're going to do some experimenting for sure. So yeah, that's kind of the fun of.
Love it, love it. There have been, well, let me ask you this question: if you would describe yourself, and yourself being River Roots as a company, do you kind of see yourself more as an NDP or an independent bottler?
Good question. Well, I would say with the blending, if you were to ask me originally, I would have said bottler, but now an NDP, I would say, because now we're starting to do, more blending and making things. Because hey, I understand, right? Like, what are we doing different from other people? We're sourcing whiskey and just bottling it, but now we're kind of making things our own with some blends and things like that. I guess creating our own identity with the Founders Reserve while still trying to find those good barrels of whiskey across the country.
And looking to the future, I mean, you said right from the beginning that part of your business plan involved eventually being both what you are right now, but also a distillery.
Mm-hmm.
And that Tom, who's got those decades of brewing experience, is going to be your distiller.
Yep.
So, what does that look like for your next kind of steps to go into distilling your own product?
Yeah, I mean, we already started to do it. We already started to make a rye, um, and we'll start to actually barrel it or age it and stuff like that. But really, right now, it's kind of just experimenting about like what would taste good, what we want to do. Um, Honestly, even though I'm not much of a clear spirits person, I do see the benefit from a business perspective of doing like a gin or a vodka and making it available in the state of Ohio. Um, so yeah, we're just kind of experimenting that and kind of letting that grow and see where we can find our little niche or something that we think would be interesting and make it more of our own while still doing these blends and these source single barrels. And actually, David, so we spoke about the 14-year port. We spoke about the 5-year bourbon that's available now. But starting in January, there'll be two other spirits that will be available. We're going to have a 9-year Kentucky bourbon available for purchase, single barrel, cask strength, and again, kind of navigating those price points and trying to get people's interest while not having that too crazy of a price. We're actually having that around $90 a bottle for the 9-year Kentucky bourbon. And it is not from the same distillery as the 5-year. If anybody's interested, the mash bill is 78.5% corn. And if you looked it up, because I had to, about in 2020, there was this mysterious Kentucky mash bill that hit the market. Places like Old Soul and Bull Run and stuff like that got some 15-year-old of this. And yeah, it's the same stuff, but 9 years old. It's around 118 proof, and it is delicious.
I have had some of that
And
mash bill, so I'm looking
yeah,
forward to
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. And so again, like this is just I learned about this whiskey. It's not something that's readily available on the market. We got it at a good price point, which I was able to obviously at a single barrel Kentucky bourbon from a major distillery being available for $90 from an NDP is I would say pretty reasonable price. And then also we have a 7-year rye, 95.5. You know what that is. And those will be single barrel. I'm blanking out on the price. I think it's going to be $72 or $75 when it becomes available in January. So another pretty good price point for a 7-year 95.5 single barrel cask strength rye.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I also see on the website you've got coming soon Applejack and rum as well.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm working on the rum, getting the barrels of that, trying to do Foursquare rum, but we'll see if that's actually possible. Hey, I can say that, right? I haven't purchased anything, so
Yeah.
but um, yeah, the Applejack is also something that's interesting. I have a friend that has some very old age cask strength Applejack. Sometimes it's finished in like maple barrels. Not many people in the bourbon community have tasted it. An Applejack, like a well-aged Applejack, especially when it's finished, it's almost like a dessert bourbon. So if any of your listeners have kind of like that sweeter tooth, man, those things can be really good. So experimenting about getting just a few barrels of that to expose the bourbon community to that type of spirit.
I'm a native New Yorker. Applejack is very familiar.
There
So
you go. Yeah.
out here. So I wanted to ask too about obviously you're called River Roots. All the people involved based in Cleveland or have strong connections to Cleveland.
Mhm.
Um, are there plans to involve either Cleveland distilleries or larger Ohio distilleries in some future projects?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely Cleveland based. River Roots, by the way, the name is the Cuyahoga River, which runs right through Cleveland. Yes, it did light on fire in the 70s, but we're past that, guys. We're past that. But yeah, so that's why River Roots. There's that connection between the river and all the owners. But our partnership with other distilleries, you know what? I don't know. It all depends on the partnerships that we've had we've made a lot of partners with breweries right now that as soon as we dump these barrels, we're giving them to breweries in the area, and they're aging stouts like already like close to 10 different breweries are using our barrels, which is cool marketing for us and really cool, to experience. It's not often in this area are you getting freshly dumped Kentucky bourbon barrels and being able to like immediately put a beer in it. But as it comes from like other distilleries in the state of Ohio, and if they'd ever want to collaborate or let us purchase some stuff, yeah, we'd have to see what the barrels taste like, what they would want to do, how that partnership would look like. It's all about like finding really good stuff. And the Applejack that I was talking about would be from Ohio distiller, so that I know makes good stuff. But yeah, it's kind of just finding those opportunities and finding unique stuff that if I'm interested in, I know other people would be interested in. Other bourbon consumers would be interested in. So as long as it tastes good, it's interesting, and it comes at a digestible price that I can pass on to the customers. That's kind of like the three main pillars, I guess.
Fantastic. And I think it's a good way to wrap up. I mean, this being the first, long form interview you guys have done for River Roots, I know there's a lot more information that will be coming in the next months, years to come. And you're always welcome on back to talk about some of those products. I would love to hear more when they come out about the Applejack, if you're able to secure some of that Foursquare. Or if you go totally off profile and go with the Jamaican, that could be interesting too. Big rum fan as well. So
yeah.
And when that last port barrel becomes available, I'm gonna do my best to grab one. If not, there's always more bourbon, but sometimes you want some bourbons more than the others. So we'll figure that out. So Ryan, thanks so much for taking the time introducing us to it's brand new. We'll call you an NDP because I think you're right. You fit better as an NDP right now than an independent bottler. Gives you more flexibility and shows more range, I think, of what you guys are really doing. So I've been super impressed so far, and yeah, we look forward to what's coming next.
Cheers. I appreciate it, David, and thanks to all the listeners for listening in.
Awesome. Well, with that, we will see y'all next week. Make sure to like and subscribe. There will be in the show notes, as always, links to the social media so you can follow, as Ryan said, River Roots on Instagram, on the website, so you don't miss a new a new release, I should say. And with that, yeah, I'll see you all next week. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.